All right, welcome to day 8. Today's readings come from 1 Samuel chapters 16 and 17. We're going to start with prayer.
Jesus, this is my prayer. Please forgive me all my sins. Any demons, curses affecting my life, I renounce them all again. Please remove the veil from my eyes and ears for you. Open my eyes to see the truth. Open my ears to hear the truth. Open my mind to know the only truth is found in you. Amen.
All right, so we had just finished in Joshua learning about how Joshua was going to save the people and bring them to their promised land, right? Now, the next book in the Bible is Judges. We don't have any readings from here, but just a quick review. The whole theme of Judges is the downward spiral of Israel's spiritual life into chaos, showing a need that they need a godly king to help to lead them. They need a good leader. Time and again, what we see in Judges is Israel turned its back on God and turned to the Canaanites, the people who lived in Canaan, and other gods. By the end of Judges, Israel had violated its covenant with God in almost every way imaginable. So put ourselves in the Israelite shoes. They go over into Canaan. These are, in general, more, in the Israelites' mind, more sophisticated, more cultured. And the Canaanites, in general, worship a god named Baal, who was actually there, but a demon. He wanted to do things his way. He was more powerful than them, and that's why they wanted to worship him. But did all sorts of things that, they sacrificed their own kids, murder, right? While worshiping, he said it was good to combine immoral sexual pleasure along with the worship, which we all know God favors sexual relationships between man and wife, right? We all know that. That's why we were part of how we were made. But God specifically says, don't commit adultery and don't do it in immoral ways. So that's the whole theme of Judges. Then we go on to the book of Ruth. The whole point of Ruth is it points to David as being the future godly king. So Ruth is the great-great-grandmother of David. There's lots of great stories in there, so I would read it when you get the time. But also it's written in hopes that the 12 tribes, which we've already talked about, the sons of Jacob were the 12 tribes of Israel. They were now divided into 2 nations. And this was written in hopes that they would reunite. So that's Judges, then comes Ruth. Now we're on to 1 Samuel, where our reading from today comes from. So 1 and 2 Samuel, there's 2 books of Samuel. They relate the establishment of the legitimate Davidic monarchy in Israel, meaning David is going to be the king of Israel. David fully listens to God and does what God wants, and he is going to be the future king. He is a shepherd's son who essentially was out watching his sheep and got called on one day, and we're going to go through that story. And God was pleased to bless him. So this king, David, his focus was on keeping Mosaic law. So what Samuel does is it establishes the monarchy in Israel by anointing first Saul, then David. So Samuel is a person, right? Samuel, God talks to Samuel, and Samuel anoints Saul, and then eventually David. So this first reading we're going to do discusses how Saul had been anointed and what happens. Why did God choose David over Saul eventually? So let's listen to this reading. It's 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 17 through 28.
And Samuel said, though you are little in your own eyes, you are not the head of the tribes of Israel. The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you pounce on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and I have gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have devoted the Amalekites to destruction. But the people took of the spoil sheep and oxen, the best of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is an iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may bow before the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. As Samuel turned to go away, Saul seized the skirt of his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day, and has given it to a neighbor of yours, who is better than you.
Yeah, so the whole point of that is in Saul's mind, because he was doing the works of God, they were doing the sacrifices, they were doing the offerings. Even though he didn't obey what God specifically told him to do, he thought through the works that they were doing that he was still obeying. And what the Lord said is, no, you disobeyed me. I specifically told you what to do. You disobeyed me. I don't care about the works. I don't care about the sacrifices. I wanted you to follow what I asked you to do. And so from that point forward, Saul was no longer anointed, and God is now looking to anoint somebody else that was going to be the ruler. So that leads us to our next reading, which is 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 7.
The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice. And I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me him whom I declare to you. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peacefully? And he said, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before me. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart.
Yeah, so that last line, I think we really need to look at. He said, for the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, and the Lord looks on the heart. And we hear that over and over again in the Bible. It's having the faith, believing in your heart, doing the right things, sharing his love, sharing his light, right? It doesn't matter what we look like, what we wear. He's going to take care of all of that. But what is actually written on our hearts? Are we surrendered to God and doing what he wants us to do? And kind of the whole point of that reading, what's happening there is the Lord says to Samuel, again, Samuel's the one the Lord is speaking through. He had originally anointed Saul. We just read how Saul got that taken away. Now they're going to come to find the next king. So the Lord said to Samuel, go to Jesse. Jesse's a father. He's got 8 sons, and the future anointed one is there, or the future king is there. So they start with the oldest son. They bring him out. Samuel says, not it. Bring the next one. Not it. Not it. Go through all 7. And Samuel says, well, where's the other? And Jesse says, well, I've got a young son. He's out in the field with the sheep. And Samuel said, well, bring him here. And he's young. And here comes David. And Samuel says, this is the one. So David is then chosen. After that, there's a lot of kind of back and forth about Saul and what ends up happening with him. Saul was still king at that time, but he is no longer the anointed one. And so Saul goes to the people who help him. And he said, I need someone to actually be with here and help me and make sure that I've got, I'm getting good feedback and knowing what I need to know. And they said, well, David knows that. So David came to help Saul, and Saul loved him. Saul listened to him, did what he wanted. So now David's in the castle with Saul. Moving forward in 1 Samuel, the Philistines, which are not part of the Israelites, they gather and they want to have a war with Israel. And one of the leaders of the Philistines, his name is Goliath. I think we've all heard of the story of David and Goliath. Goliath was a beast of a man, and he said, I want to fight with your best man, and whoever wins, wins. So let's read Samuel 17, verses 32 through 37, which talks about that.
When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him.
Oh,
and David's...
I'm so sorry. I didn't set that up correctly. This is talking about how Israel chose the person who was going to fight for them against Goliath. So Goliath said, choose a person. This is how they chose that person. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and you have been a man of war and he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with you.
All right, so this boy, Saul, the king at the time, said, all right, you say that you can do it. You've got the faith. You go and fight against Goliath.
This is how I fight my battles. I look to you. I look to you. This is how I fight my battles. I worship you. I worship you. This is how I fight my battles. I count on you. I count on you. This is how I fight my battles. All you ask, I do. All you ask, I do. It's all for you. It's all for you. Live my life for you. It's all for you. In the past, 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 in the past. Sometimes the enemy could overwhelm me. Sometimes the enemy could be a chain. Sometimes the enemy felt all consuming, felt like a rain. Oh, in the past, 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 that's behind me now. And this is how I fight my battles. I look to you. I look to you. And this is how I fight my battles. I worship you. I worship you. And this is how I fight my battles. I count on you. I count on you. And this is how I fight my battles. All you ask, I do. All you ask, I do. It's all for you. It's all for you. I live my life for you. It's all for you. Nothing in this life can ever touch me. Nothing in this life even stands a chance. Now, nothing in this life can overtake me. For anything that comes, you've got my back. This is how I fight my battles. I look to you. I look to you. This is how I fight my battles. I worship you. I worship you. This is how I fight my battles. I count on you. Count on you. This is how I fight my battles. All you ask, I do. All you ask, I do. It's all for you. It's all for you. I live my life for you. It's all for you.
And so now this next part tells about that. This is Samuel 17 again, verses 40 through 49.
Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to beasts of the field." Then David said to Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground.
So awesome. So, I mean, this story proves, and it proves over and over again in the Bible, that if God is for us, who can be against us, right? David is this youth who just beat this giant of a man who has been a soldier and fought his entire life. That was what he was trained to do. But he didn't have God on his side. So the blessing for us is we have God on our side to take care of us. So the rest of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel go into the story of David's life, how he befriended Jonathan, Saul's son, and they were essentially best friends. They were like brothers. Then Saul ended up getting very jealous of David, and he tried to kill him several times. David had a few opportunities where he could have killed Saul, and he chose not to. And then it goes into how David was announced king. Samuel ended up passing away. And then it went into how he had his son Solomon, which we're going to be learning more about in the future. And that's essentially the story. The moral of it is David listened to God. There were times that David made mistakes. There was a big mistake that he made. He ended up meeting this lady named Bathsheba, and he fell instantly in love with her while he was married, by the way. And Bathsheba had a husband, and Bathsheba's husband went off to war, and David purposely put her husband in the front line so that he would get killed, so that he could marry Bathsheba. God was not very happy about that. And long story short, he ended up forgiving David. But anyway, then David and Bathsheba had a son who passed. They ended up of course, she was grieving about that. Then they had a son named Solomon. So Solomon, plays a big part moving forward. But the whole point is, even the people who God spoke with still sinned. They followed God as best that they could, but they still sinned. They didn't officially know right from wrong. He had to tell them every single thing, and they had to choose to obey it. So that takes us through Samuel, and it takes us to the end of today.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He gives me a resting place in His true love. He leads me to peace in the stillness of my mind. That's where He refreshes me and restores my life. He leads me in the paths of righteousness to bring honor to His name and to live again. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For Thou art with me, Thy rod and staff, they comfort me. My strength and my peace is Your authority. The comfort of my love takes away my fear. I'll never be lonely, for You are near. The table set before me when my enemies dare to fight. You anoint my head with oil till I overflow with light. Why would I fear the future when all the days of my life, goodness, love, and mercy pursue me all the time? When my life is over, when this life is through, I'll dwell in Your house forever with You.
So have a great day.